Every great story has its beginnings, but I'm not going to be telling a great story today. Instead, I'm going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. I've had a long career playing tabletop games, be it trading card games like Magic the Gathering and Yu-Gi-Oh! Or the more traditional RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons. I have the most experience playing 5th edition, but I've also played a lot of Savage Worlds and a fair bit of Pathfinder. Definitely the biggest fan of 5th edition by far. It's got the easiest to understand rules, and it's not hard to sit down and play it and get people together and get people interested in 5th edition, like it is with the other games that I play. I've DM'd about 3 games, all of which were in 5th edition, and played countless more of these different systems. And I have a setting module for 5th edition somewhere in the works. That said, I didn't start with 5th edition. Instead, I started with 4th edition, back in my early days of high school. 4th edition I know is kind of the black sheep of Dungeons & Dragons. 3rd and 1st are also somewhere in that group. 1st has that honor of being the first rendition of a game series, like Pokemon Red and Blue, Halo Combat Evolved. I would argue Super Metroid, even though it's technically the 3rd game in the Metroid series, but really, it's the first good one, so good on you, Super Metroid. I know almost nothing about 3rd edition, though, and I know that I don't want to learn anything about 3rd edition. So I was introduced to Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition by a friend that I now share with Luke TK421. Luke TK421 is the guy that I make all those Monster Hunter videos with. This friend, who I will refer to as DeRuin for reasons explained later, was more Luke's friend at the time because they went to church together and they played the same instrument in the marching band. They both played trumpet, I played saxophone. And Luke and I were, of course, good friends, and DeRuin was willing to run a game for the two of us. So I was willing to give it a shot. I had expressed some interest in playing it before. I had heard about it through the grapevine like every other high school-age kid does, and thought it sounded interesting and wanted to give it a try. Just never dipped my toes into it before. But I knew nothing about the game except for a few stories that my father had told me when we had passed a few rule books in like a Barnes & Noble or a Books A Million or something. I knew that this game could give me the experience, the Taylor experience that I was looking for, that video games just can't give you. So we met at Luke's place. It was equidistant between DeRuin's house and mine. We opened up the books that DeRuin had and started picking our races and classes. Luke was a big fan of Assassin's Creed and went hunting on the regular with his father. So he went with a classic wood elf ranger named Unir. Unir had grown up without his father and learned to hunt from his grandpa, and just wanted to find his dad and ask some questions. DeRuin decided that because of 4th edition's focus on working like a MMO, like World of Warcraft or things like that we would need a 3rd character to balance things out. So he ended up making a DM PC named DeRuin. Shocker, I know. He was a half-elf, and I don't remember what class he was. But I remember he had a lot of buffing and debuffing abilities, and eventually at one point he was able to just change positions with people on the fly, without a roll if they were willing, and they had to make a save if they weren't. And I think he used this ability once to throw a guy off of a mountain. To add to it, DeRuin and Unir ended up being half-brothers, and they shared the father, so plot thickens. I start flipping through the book, and I couldn't really find anything I wanted. I wasn't really versed in any sort of fantasy settings. Most of what I knew came from things like A Knight's Tale and The Princess Bride. I was also a big fan of Star Wars at the time, so I wanted something that kind of blended that high adventure, melee combat, and also having the basic magic powers. Something about being a chosen hero with a magic sword that just wrecked everything was just so appealing to 14-year-old me. So I'm going through the races, and I finally get to the Dragonborn. Now, the Dragonborn, apparently, were either introduced into 3.5 or 4th edition, so they were a relatively new race. And when I looked at them, I knew that they were dragon people. They didn't have the wings and the tail, but they looked like dragons, had dragon heads and scales and things, and they could breathe fire. So I was definitely on board with that, because who doesn't love dragons? And it's like half of the name of the game. If I play as this guy, I basically got half the game covered. I got the dragons half covered. It was great. It's perfect. I mean, just look at these guys. Look how freaking cool they are. Look at these guys. And these guys. It's hype. Now I just needed to pick a class, right? So I start looking at the fighter. It seems about right. It seems right up the alley of, the main character of A Knight's Tale, or some might even argue the characters in Princess Bride. I would say they're more rogues, but I wanted to wear big, heavy armor and be a cool hero and a knight. But eventually, I finally found it. the class that changed everything for me. I found the Paladin. Heavy armor, divine power, room to have a backstory about being a chosen champion of a deity and having magical powers. It was perfect. So there I was, Baron Emerald Scale, a paladin of Bahamut, the dragon god of order and justice. I kind of thought of myself as a cross between Batman and a Jedi Knight with like a dragon paint job on top of all of it. It was great. So our adventure started with a dragonborn commoner running into the village where Darwin and Unir lived, claiming that his village was under attack. The two, being generally good people, decided to head off and help him. When they got there, they found that the village, Dramborin, had been sacked in the night, and this village was where my character grew up. And I sort of acted as the divine protector, a sort of single one-man militia against the forces of whoever had attacked us. So, because I was level 1, they managed to overpower me, and I had to focus mainly on getting people to safety and not getting killed. The three characters talk, and Darwin eventually expresses that this cult sounds like something that he's encountered before. Apparently, Darwin is a part of a guild that he and Unir's father founded or was a major member of. And they had been working against this cult because they were the bad guys. I don't remember. Darwin wanted to go because they were the cult that his guild had been fighting against. Unir wanted to go because he figured it would be a good way for him to learn about his father. And I wanted to go because I needed to avenge the people that had fallen. It all worked out perfectly. So we used Unir's tracking skills to find out where the cult went, and they led us to their outpost, which was some sort of abandoned ruin. Unir managed to sneak up the wall, stab a few people, and get the gate open for Darwin and Barin. In good old Paladin fashion, I bust into the front.
Thumbs up. Ready, guys? Let's do this. Leroy Dragons! Oh my god, he just ran in.
And all of the cultists start attacking me. Now in 4th Ed, Paladins are fitted into the defender role. Basically, they're the tanks if you've ever played an MMO or a video game with classes and party building and things like that. I have a lot of abilities that make people want to stab me as opposed to my squishier friends, and that lets me make use of my ridiculously high AC. However, I couldn't really hit anyone for shit. Imagine getting poked over and over by a group of people faster than you. They aren't hurting you, but you can't stop them. All in all, it was boring, and that's kind of the sentiment I've had about 4th edition combat for a long time, is that it's really boring and tedious. And unfortunately, there were one too many cultists in the fort that I either couldn't convince to stab me in my steel pecs and ended up stabbing my squishier friends, or they just got lucky and managed to nick me in one of my less steely parts. We ended up having to be saved by the guild that Darwin worked for, who came in with a volley of arrows a la Xerxes' army from 300. While they helped clean up the surface floors and the outside of the keep, we decided to head deeper down into the keep and try to find their leader. It was time to fight the boss, the final challenge. Sure, we didn't do too hot against all the minions outside, but we were new players. We didn't really know what we were doing, and now we had some experience. We'll be a little bit smarter. And the boss fight went a little something like this. Unir shot him about 5 times in one turn, and then I dropped the biggest smite since, well, I mean, you saw it. Dude toppled faster than any forcibly planted democracy in the Middle East. And it was about where we decided to end the session. It was the start of a very fun and epic set of adventures that both Luke and I look back on fondly. Darwin doesn't really think the game went all that well since he kind of stopped running it for us. I don't think he gives himself enough credit. I only remember the good stuff, and there was a lot of it. Anyway, that's all for today. I'll see you guys in the next video. Adios.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.